Hello, my friends. Welcome to my corner. There are authors who need no introduction, so I just wanted to ask you this. When somebody says Yukio Mishima, what is the first book that comes to your mind? I'm just going to let you put that answer in the comments section. I think for most of us, myself included, when somebody says Mishima, we think about a novel. That was the case for me before I read other works by him. But I wanted to focus on a different aspect of his work that I feel needs more comment. Let me show you this. I've just read this beautiful book titled La Perla y Otros Cuentos. What I want to focus on is Mishima's short stories. I bought this book in Madrid back in 2014, and all of these years I had been building the anticipation to finally experience his short stories, and I have just done that, and I am so happy that I did, that I wanted to comment on that aspect of his work that is, I believe, often neglected. So even though I read the Spanish edition, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the English version that is published of his short stories, which is titled Death in Midsummer and Other Stories. Basically, the Spanish and the English versions are equivalent. The only thing that changes is the order of the short stories that are included. So before we go into the individual short stories that are included in this collection, Death in Midsummer and Other Stories, or La Perla y Otros Cuentos, which is the one that I read, I wanted to give you just a general information about the collection of short stories and also some of the themes that you can find here. So this is a collection of 10 short stories, okay? This is what we have in Spanish and in English. Though keep an open mind when it comes to the genre, okay? Because some of the stories that you find here can be read as examples of other genres. I'm gonna let you know as we, encounter those texts what other genres I am thinking about. So, Death in Midsummer, the collection of short stories, was published for the first time in 1966 in a translation by Edward G. Seidensticker. And I am sure that the name sounds familiar to you because Seidensticker has translated many of the classics of Japanese literature, and as far as I can tell, being a reader of Spanish, English, French, and other languages primarily, but not Japanese, as far as I can tell, as I was saying, he has done a very, very good job. In English, the collection of stories is 180 pages long. So that makes it very easy for me to calculate the average length of a short story. We are talking about 18 pages, of course, to each of the short stories. The shortest one is about 6 pages in length, and the longest one is 26 pages long, just to give you an idea of what kind of a short story we are talking about. And regarding the themes, right, what kind of themes can you find in Death in Midsummer and Other Stories? The first one, the one that stood out to me was relational conflict. So, of course, conflict between couples, like a man and a woman, but also conflict between men and between women. You will also find the obsession with death that nobody who knows Mishima should be surprised by. Sexual ambiguity is another theme that is prominent in this collection. Also, surprising to me, maybe a little bit, spirituality. I found that many of the stories dealt with that. And finally, the last one that I wanted to mention, at least, was the conflict that is brought about in a society that is primarily traditional when modernity comes in. So one thing that is interesting is that both in English and in Spanish, the collection of stories begins with the story Death in Midsummer. This is the one that introduces us to the short story aspect of Mishima's work. In this story, we have a woman who goes to the beach with her 3 children and with her sister-in-law. Now, what I'm about to tell you is not a spoiler. Okay, this is the way that the story begins. We know this from the very start. What happens is that the sister-in-law and 2 of the children die. So that is the very premise of the story. And because of that, this story is an exploration of guilt, an exploration of loss, and also of the process of mourning, which, as you know, is different for different people. But we have a great tragedy at the very beginning of this short text. And primarily, what I noticed in this story was the contrast between the way that the woman dealt with loss and the man on the other hand. And Mishima makes a very interesting comment here. He says that men are more sentimental than women, which is something that maybe traditionally we would not expect. It's of course something that can be debated, but it's something to look out for when you read the story. His comments on how the man and the woman deal with this loss separately. And you're going to find this also in other stories, because remember that relational conflict is one of the themes that you can see most obviously in the short stories of Mishima, the ones that we have in English and in Spanish at least. So the action in this short story takes place over a period of 2 years, and you're going to see that there's very close attention paid to the seasons. So the passing of time as marked by the 4 seasons. So that's a key element right there. And also another key element of Mishima as a whole, right, his work as a whole, is the presence of the sea. You can think of titles like Sound of Waves, like The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. The sea is also a prominent element in Mishima's work, and this story is an example of that also. In the English edition, the second story that we find is 3 million yen. And just as a matter of trivia, let me tell you, the Spanish version that I have here ends with that story, which I thought was very interesting and also very effective. But that was my experience of the text, so I cannot compare it to the English version in that sense. This one is about a couple who want to have a child, but for financial reasons they have to keep putting that off. And at the moment that we meet them in the story, what they're doing is they're killing time at an amusement park as they wait for an appointment with a woman. So what we have from the beginning is that sense of expectation, right? We know that they are waiting for this time to meet this woman, but we have no idea what the appointment is about. So you can see what that does to us as readers, right? It creates that expectation that keeps us reading in order to find out what it is that this couple has to do with this other woman, right? So we have the man on one side who is childish and optimistic. He's very hopeful, for example. He believes there is hope even in post-war Japan, and he despises the younger generations who think that everything is bleak and there's just no hope anymore. That's the man. And on the other hand, we have the woman who is more down to earth. Okay, that is also something that I associate with Mishima, the down-to-earth women versus the men who are maybe more sentimental according to him, but also more given to obsessions and the type of behavior that is unexpected and maybe even, dangerous in many cases. We're going to see a little bit of that in some of the stories that are coming up. So I think that 3 million yen is really a good old-fashioned short story. And what I mean by that is a story that leads us readers to that climax, to that turning point in the story, which has to do with that appointment that the couple have with this other woman. So that is a narrative device that really works. To me, the revelation at the end, that climax, came as a shock. But I'll leave it up to you to experience that. And another good narrative device that we have in this story are the senbei, which are a type of rice cracker that the couple are eating throughout the story. So as they eat, we continue with the plot. So I thought that was really well done and very interesting also. Something to keep in mind about this one, I would say that ultimately 3 million yen, as the title indicates, is about social class. So that's one of the frames in which you can read this story. I just wanted to mention that. The next one has an interesting and very strange title, to me at least, Thermos Bottles. Okay, when I read it in Spanish, El Termo, I was like, wow, that is a really weird title. Let's see what this is about. This one has at its center a Japanese man who goes on a business trip, and he meets a Japanese woman in San Francisco. The woman turns out to be a former geisha that he had been involved with. So be aware there is that element there. The story is asking you to accept quite a bit right there, because they meet in San Francisco totally unexpectedly. And, it could be a bit of a stretch. But if you accept that, this is a very, very good story. So the woman is with her little daughter, and the daughter is afraid or scared of thermos bottles. That is weird, right? But it's even weirder because the man's son back in Japan is also scared of thermos bottles. So that's a little bit of a mystery right there to him. I was thinking as I read the story that a very good alternate title would have been Brief Encounter. Has nothing to do with the movie titled Brief Encounter, or very little to do with it, but I thought that would be a nice way to think about this thermos bottle story. In the background of the story, of course, we have this man and this woman who meet unexpectedly in San Francisco, who were former lovers. But in the background, we have the figure of the man's wife back in Japan, whom we meet, quote unquote, through a letter at the beginning of the story, because the man he wants to see the Japanese characters, so he reads the letter. He knows it almost by heart. So that is the presence of the woman, his wife, back in Japan. So this is a nice little story about the lasting effect that other people may have in our lives, and that our relationship with them, how that shapes our lives also. Number four, the fourth story in the collection is titled The Priest of Shiga Temple and His Love. Okay, so we have the love between a priest and somebody else. It's really, really interesting because we have an ascetic who has basically renounced the world. He lives completely by himself. He has put behind him worldly things until he sees the beautiful imperial concubine and he falls desperately in love. So look at that premise. That is wonderful, if you ask me. I love that kind of story. Here's the interesting thing. When the woman finds out that there's this man who's obsessed with her, she begins to develop some kind of a fascination for this man also. So this story, I would say, is one of the best explorations that I have found of that love that transcends physical union, right? This is about two people who are connected. It's a relationship that takes place beyond the physical plane. The key theme that I found here is renunciation, and how men renunciate or renounce the world, and women renounce the world. Is it possible, right? It's a debate right there between the characters. Another way to look at it would be as a story about the fascination that we have with what is unattainable, what is beyond our reach, and maybe, and or I would say, about the fact that maybe sometimes the worldly longings that we have, right, the desire that we may have for a person or a thing here in this plane of existence, maybe points to a transcendent need that we have, to that kind of love that we all crave, the kind of love that never dies, right? So that's an option right there as you read the story of the priest of Shiga Temple and his love. The fifth story is The Seven Bridges. I really liked this one. It's about three geisha and a woman who accompanies them, who is a very simple woman, okay, very down to earth, very, very simple girl who is accompanying them on their journey. And the journey consists of this. They have to cross 7 bridges without saying a word. Think about that challenge, okay? So they're all together and they have to cross these bridges without saying a word, remaining in complete silence in order for their prayers to come true. And we know what they have asked for. We know that one of them wants to marry an actor that she knows. Another one wants a companion or a protector. And then another one asks for money. We don't know what the girl, the simple girl that accompanies them, has asked for. So we are basically in tension in this story, because we don't know whether they're going to be able to cross all these bridges without saying a word. So that's what holds the story together, that sense of anticipation. Maybe, are they going to make it or not? So you could look at this as a story about prayer, but I am more inclined to think of it as a story about superstition, because it's more of about like the character's happiness, maybe their lives, right? In the sense of their happiness, their future depends on an action that they must carry out precisely in a specific way. So the tension of that, right, is what holds the narrative together. So it's a very effective little story. Then we have the longest story in the collection, which is Patriotism, and this is probably Yukio Mishima's most famous short story. It just combines eroticism and horror in a very effective way, but it's also, because of that connection that we have right there, a very creepy story and even a very difficult to read story, I would say. So in this story, a lieutenant decides to commit seppuku after he finds out that he may be asked to fight his friends who were involved in an uprising. So imagine that situation right there for a soldier. It gets more complicated as usual with Mishima, because his wife, when they got married, promised that if he ever came to that point of having to commit suicide, she would follow him. So you can see what this couple find themselves in. And by the way, this is not a spoiler or anything, because you find out about that in the very first page of the story. The whole story is held together by this. Because we know how the story is going to end from the very beginning, and also because this story is separated into brief chapters or divided into little chapters, I tend to read it as a novella. That's one of the things that I meant when I told you, keep an open mind when it comes to genre, because some of these quote-unquote short stories may be other things. So I think Patriotism is a novella, and actually it has been published independently. There is an edition that you can find that features only Patriotism by itself. So that kind of supports my idea of this being a novella. It's very eerie, okay, especially when you consider it and you read it in the light of the way that Mishima himself decided to end his life. So there is that element right there of autobiography. It's like when you read about Pushkin talking about duels. You know what I mean? It's that kind of a connection. And by the way, Mishima also made a movie version of Patriotism. He directed it and he acted in the leading role in this film. His wife, after his death, tried to get the film destroyed, but obviously that didn't happen because, as you may know, this film is in the Criterion Collection. I have not seen it, unfortunately. So if you have, please let me know what you think about it, so that I can have an idea of how the text compares to the film version. As I said before, this was really tough to read for me, especially the descriptions of seppuku, because they are so graphic. But at the same time, even though I had to put the book down after reading a little bit, I was like, okay, I need to stop a little bit and then I can come back to it. That to me is a testimony of Mishima's powers when it comes to description, because it's so vivid that you can almost see what is happening, and it's just terrible, the pathos of this story, and that combination of love or obsession and death. Love and obsession being, love and death, I mean, being an obsession in both cases. Then we have the seventh story, which is Dojoji. And if the other one, the previous one that we talked about, Patriotism, could be read as a novella, Dojoji is basically a little play. You have the dialogue between the characters. To me, this was a perplexing tale, and I'll tell you why in a second. What we have here is a seller who is auctioning a huge wardrobe. Okay, it's just an immense piece of furniture, and the price keeps going up and keeps going up until one woman says, okay, I'm going to tell everybody the true story of this wardrobe. And that is when the story actually gets started. Now, this play, Dojoji, is actually based on a famous No play of the same title. So that's why I was saying it was perplexing to me, because I feel that I did not have the background in order to understand this little story fully. At one point, the woman locks herself up inside the wardrobe. And I understand that in the original play, what we have, Dojoji, is a temple to which women are forbidden to enter. So you have this idea of entering a forbidden place, right? Just like the woman enters the wardrobe. There's also, if you look at the original play, a serpent woman who hides inside a bell. And in the short story, the wardrobe has a little design of a bell on it. So you see the connection right there. I think this is a great story, but once again, I feel that I should have more information about the play in order to actually appreciate it and enjoy it a lot more. Another famous story in this collection, or at least well known, maybe not famous, famous is too strong a word in this case, but the next one, number 8, is Onnagata. In this one, a man decides to become an actor because he is fascinated with the performance or, the life of a particular Onnagata. And just in case you don't know, Onnagata is a man who plays women's roles on stage. So it's very interesting because the emphasis here is placed on staying in character. Right? The idea here is that if you want to be a good actor, in this case, a good Onnagata, what you have to do is that you have to become a woman, even in your real life. So you have to stay in character so that your performance is not really a performance. You are basically becoming the character that you are representing on stage. One of the quotes that I liked from this story is this one. An Onnagata is the child born of the illicit union between dream and reality. Okay, so the illicit union between dream and reality. And what we have in this story is a love triangle between 3 men, okay, one of whom plays women on stage. So one of the themes here, I would say, is the blurry line that exists between the stage or art and real life. I really like that because it's about a character who basically lives his life as if it were a play. He cannot make that distinction, the actor who is the Onnagata here. I really liked the ending. The ending was a little bit open, just open enough for my taste. And I think because of the setting and also because of the main character, this story made me think about Kon Ichikawa's great film An Actor's Revenge. So it may have not a lot to do, one text with the other when it comes to the story itself, but I just wanted to recommend that film to you because it's one of the best films by Kon Ichikawa, who is also one of my favorite directors. That brings us to number 9, which is titled The Pearl, and that is the title story of this collection, La Perla, right? Y otros cuentos. This story features 5 friends who are all secretly 43. They never tell anybody else what their age is. And they all get together for a birthday party. At one point, what happens is that the host cannot find a pearl that she has that goes with a ring. So that's the idea behind the story, right? This loss of the pearl. Basically, what the story does is to trace the ramifications of that loss and what happens because of it. So one of the ladies at one point decides to do something that is not very smart. She's embarrassed by the fact that the host is looking for this pearl. So what she does is she says, "Oh, I'm sorry, but I was eating my cake and I accidentally ate the pearl. It was in my plate and I ate it." Very strange way to react, right? So that's what she does. And what follows is basically just a hilarious dissection, I would say, of the ties that bind these women together. There are revelations here that the characters don't want to reveal. Basically, hidden emotions are just laid bare in front of our eyes, and nobody wants to actually say what happened during the time that they were together. Nobody wants to tell the truth. Everybody wants to hide something, and that is basically the main conflict of this story. I think this story is noteworthy. It's the one of the first stories that I would recommend to somebody who has not read Mishima's short stories, because it features something to me rare, right? Which is a humorous Mishima. Most of the time I associate Mishima with dark desires, obsessions, death, and things like that. But this is a very humorous short story, so I highly recommend The Pearl. And then finally, the last story in the collection in English, not in the Spanish version, but I thought this was a very good decision to end Death in Midsummer and Other Stories with this tale, is Swaddling Clothes. This is a short story, but more precisely I would say it is a short. Okay, and there's a lot that goes into that, and I'm not going to go into the features of the genre or anything like that, because that would take a very long time, but I just wanted to kind of emphasize that. Swaddling Clothes is my personal favorite of the stories by Yukio Mishima, and of course I explored this story in a previous video that I did in Spanish, so if you want to hear more in detail about Swaddling Clothes, I recommend that video. If you do not speak Spanish, you can use the auto-translate option of the subtitles, and I always edit my subtitles, so it gives you a pretty good version of what I am saying in English. At least I can tell you about English. Other languages I am not so sure, but I think it's pretty good too. So Swaddling Clothes is very brief, it's understated, it's, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say it's poetic, okay? It's poetic, it's suggestive, okay? And the key theme right here is the differences between the male and the female perspective towards a single event that both of them witnessed, right? To the husband in this story, who, by the way, remains unnamed, and that I think is very important, because the wife does have a name in the story, but the husband remains unnamed. What happens, right, in the tale is a joke, is something to laugh about. To the woman, on the other hand, is a complete obsession, right? This is something that haunts her. What happens is this: a couple have a babysitter, and she unexpectedly goes into labor and gives birth to a child right there in their house. The couple also have a kid who is just a baby. So there's a connection right there between the child that is born and the child who is already there. The doctor comes in and he swaddles this newborn child in newspapers, maybe from the woman's perspective, right, to signal the fact that this is an illegitimate child. And that is her obsession, right? The story traces the very deep, the profound effect that this event has on the life of this wife, right? After she is also separated from her husband, not separated in the sense of that they separated or divorced or anything like that, but when she is by herself. And then the story gets complicated as she takes a walk in the park and meets somebody there. But once again, for this story, if you would like to hear more, let me refer you to that other video. I think for this video that I'm just giving you an overview of Mishima's short stories, what I have told you kind of gives you a good idea of what this story is about. And plus, it's a short. So shorts are, for the most part, it's like read them and experience them. So the bottom line here, I would say that all the stories that are included in Death in Midsummer and Other Stories are just masterful. Okay, I think Mishima, that's one of the reasons why I decided to do this video, because Mishima is an amazing novelist, but he's also a superb short story writer. And that is something that not many people say, because of course novels tend to be more important, or at least they have more weight when it comes to a reading experience. I have added Death in Midsummer and Other Stories to my mental list of favorite short story collections. So I just wanted to say that. The style, I think, is just flawless, right? And the themes that you're going to find in this collection are ever relevant. So it's that type of writing. It's the kind of writing that never gets old. So if you read Mishima's novels, of course, you're going to notice that he always pays very close attention to detail. But that becomes even more evident in the short stories because of the very nature of the genre. So that's one of the reasons why I would recommend them, because they really highlight that. And I think if you read the short stories and then you read the novels, you will probably expect more when it comes to the details of the novels, because you are trained to read Mishima that way through his short stories. So I would say, by all means, read Mishima's novels. They are amazing. I love all of the ones that I have read, which are not many. I will say, I have not read all of Mishima's novels. I have probably read a handful of them. But please do not forget the short stories, because they are amazing and they are quite satisfying. And I will say among the best examples of the genre that I have encountered in my personal experience. Even I would say, in world literature, but also in the context of Japanese literature, which, as you know, is very rich when it comes to the short story. So, do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. So those are my 2 cents on the short stories of Yukio Mishima, as you can find them in the volume Death in Midsummer and Other Stories, or if you're reading in Spanish, like me, in La Perla y Otros Cuentos. Just let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.